Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Pathways to Happiness podcast. My name is Nena Lavonne, and today we are going to be talking all about how to keep politics and political differences from ruining our relationships and our mental health. So we have a huge topic today and an extremely important one. But before we dive in, I just want to, as always, thank you so much for all your incredible support, both here and on the Nena Lavonne YouTube channel. This has turned into such an amazing community, and I could not be more grateful. So if you have not already subscribed, please take a moment to do so. We definitely want you to stay connected. So that being said, let's jump into today's topic. So we actually have a lot of things to cover. We're going to be talking about how political opinions are formed, why it is we often have such differing opinions, how we can become more tolerant and accepting of other viewpoints, and most importantly, how we can keep these differences from ruining our relationships, and how to keep politics in general from harming our mental health. We are about to become bombarded with political ads, being subjected to all kinds of craziness on social media, with everyone feeling so passionate about their personal views and their candidates. And if 4 years ago is any kind of indication of what we are in for until November, I think it is highly important that we get prepared mentally and emotionally so we can get through it all without it causing us stress and anxiety and problems with family members or coworkers or anyone else that we find that may have a different opinion than our own. So this podcast is for everyone. It's for people who don't care at all about politics, that know they're going to be hearing about it whether they like it or not for the next few months. It's for people who feel passionately about certain issues or candidates, for good or for bad, and want to share their opinion and feel it's their civic duty to do so. And it's also for people who have their own opinions but really just prefer to keep it to themselves or to their immediate family. So we are going to talk about keeping our sanity no matter what our position is, because the amount of mental exhaustion that these topics can cause is immense and takes a way bigger toll on our mental health than we often realize. So I truly hope that this proves to be a useful resource for you, because with the world going through so much as it is right now, safeguarding our emotional well-being is critical. The whole world is on edge right now. We have a lot of people that are going through a lot of very real things right now. We have job losses, we have financial issues and career changes and children suddenly at home, and just a general feeling like we miss the way the world used to be, and we're wondering what the new reality is going to end up like. So a lot of people are just wrestling with a lot of serious life-altering issues as it is. And I think back to the last election and how much disruption politics caused for relationships. I saw just so much ugliness, friendships ending, family members not talking to one another. And before this year becomes a repeat of that, or even worse, because we are on edge, I just felt like it was a good opportunity to talk about what we can do to prevent this, because with everyone in such a fragile state to begin with, I think we need to be a little more careful. I also want to say that this podcast is not endorsing any political party or opinions whatsoever. In fact, it will not mention anything or anyone by name. This is purely coming at the topic from the standpoint of looking for actionable strategies to prevent future relationship issues and anxiety due to politics in general. So, firstly, let me state the obvious. People are different. Really, really different. Oftentimes we surround ourselves with people who are very similar, so we forget that. But we have to keep it in mind, because different people just see the world differently. Our perceptions of the exact same situation can sometimes only have vague similarities. And this is, of course, also true for our beliefs and for our morals. So Where do our political views actually come from? There are many things that come into play, but there are several major factors. Some of the things that shape our political identity are our gender and our ethnicity, our family and their belief system, the news medias we choose to listen to, our religion, where we live, our financial situation, and our peer group. All of these things play a huge factor in how our opinions are formed, and of course, our own personality and life experiences do, because they directly influence how we perceive any situation. So we have to understand first and foremost that we have our own opinions, attitudes, values, and beliefs that are completely unique to us. They are the lens through which we see the world, but everyone else has their own pair of glasses. So they could read the exact same article, watch the exact same debate, and still have completely a different understanding and interpretation of what is going on and what is really being said. We are also subject to what's called the biased assimilation effect, which is a type of cognitive bias that leads us to only believe evidence that supports what we already believe. It's the tendency to evaluate belief consistent information more positively than believe inconsistent information. So, in other words, even if we are hearing other viewpoints that aren't in alignment with our own, we are unlikely to give them much credibility. And we are also highly unlikely, at least from a psychological perspective, to spend much of any time doing research that could potentially be in conflict with our views. We are much more likely to find news outlets or blogs or social media outlets that support what we already believe. So once we have a view, we usually cling to it, and in many cases actively try to reinforce it. And this isn't a criticism, this is human nature. By the way, there is also another type of cognitive bias, which is called the confirmation bias, which also happens all the time. And this is the tendency to interpret or search for information that, again, supports or confirms our values or our opinions. And this can happen subtly, or it can actually start to distort real evidence and facts and strongly affect our decisions. Now, of course, from a self-growth perspective, that might not be conducive to our continued learning or our intellectual evolution, because we are subconsciously blocking out conflicting opinions, but that is definitely not today's topic. And for now, we'll just have to accept that this is a very common behavior for human beings, and that, yes, we should have an awareness of it. If our informational sources are especially out of balance, we might find this to become potentially problematic. And we also have to realize that oftentimes when we have an opinion, it can start to push into the zone of being a part of our identity. So a lot of times who we are as people gets confused with what we believe, not just politically, but all around. So it starts to become really, really personal. So in a way, when we feel that people reject our political opinion, it can feel like they are rejecting us or our intelligence or our values. And that can either hurt us, or it can make us feel really defensive or angry, and it can make us subconsciously or even consciously want to prove them wrong, or even more commonly, get them to believe that our own opinion is the better opinion. Now, interestingly enough, while not always true, we will find that our friends and the people we have chosen to be in our life oftentimes do share a similar viewpoint. We do tend to select people in our life that are similar to us and that support our same ideas and interests. Again, not always true and not always what would be the most enriching for our lives, but still often true. Now, we might find in our romantic relationships that we sometimes have differing ideas or interests, and a lot of times we are romantically attracted to our opposites, so that can show up politically as well. So it's certainly possible that we may have a different political opinion than our partner. And even more commonly, we may have a differing opinion than some of our family members, especially as we get older and we kind of separate into our own little families. So opinions can start to change, or differences can seem more pronounced. And the place that we are going to find the biggest differences are usually between coworkers or friends that you aren't as close with, or people that you are friends with, maybe online, that you haven't seen in a while or haven't been an active part of your life for years. But all of a sudden, when they have a strong opinion that is in conflict with your own, suddenly they are going to take up a whole lot of your mental energy, even though they are not an active part of your life normally. And that becomes the case all around. We start dreading our interactions with these people when we know the topic of politics is going to come up, and we know that we're going to get triggered, or we're going to be trapped in a conversation that we either don't care about or we completely disagree with. So I have a few points that I wanted to bring up before we really look at solutions, because I think these are things we don't always take into consideration when we are feeling so angry, or when we just can't understand how on earth someone could have the opinion that they do. So these are a few things to keep in mind, and we'll talk about them first, and then we'll talk about strategies to help us stay sane and to, again, protect our relationships from being harmed by all these political conversations during election season. So the first thing to keep in mind is that when we have a difference of opinion that we really can't understand, we have to know that sometimes the other person is not necessarily endorsing a candidate. They may be endorsing their values. And this is why it can become very hurtful a lot of times and very personal. In politics, we also generally have often a few key issues that we are most passionate about that often shape how we're going to vote or who we're going to support. And so a lot of times we feel that we have to kind of sweep other things under the rug that we aren't really fully on board with, or we aren't really feeling our ideal, because we feel like we need to somehow stand up for what we might feel is the bigger picture, or again, that one issue or the few issues that we really do feel passionately about. So in these cases, we are in a way, again, endorsing our values more than we're endorsing a particular candidate. But that's a lot of times something that can be very difficult to communicate, and certainly hard to receive for the other person, because they're just really seeing the things that are getting swept under the rug. And a lot of times when other people don't have the same values or the same issues that they are passionate about, or even potentially they disagree with, they are likely to much more deeply look at those other things that we are trying to downplay, or that we don't really care about that much, especially if they are trying to sway our opinion, or if it seems like they could successfully use it as ammunition against our viewpoint. And that can really make things start to escalate, and the situation can start to become really emotional. Because really it just starts to become a matter of trying to push buttons and trying to be right. It becomes a competition and not a conversation anymore. And that's when relationships start to get destroyed, when things become personal. So we have to mentally keep in mind that when we are having these discussions, that it is more than just politics for some people. It could be crossing into religion, into morality, into issues that concern injustice, things that are just huge for that other person. So again, we are going to talk about solutions shortly, but we have to remember to keep the word respect in mind when we are having these conversations, because we all have different concerns that make sense with our own lifestyle and our own viewpoint. So even if we are arguing about a candidate, it may not really be about a candidate for that person. It might be about something way bigger. So when we are critical of it, it can just hurt that much more. So that key word is respect. The second thing I want to mention is huge, and it's something that seems so obvious, but yet we forget it all the time, and that is simply that the likelihood that we will change someone else's opinion is close to zero, especially if we are delivering a message in a hostile way. So we can just reverse this situation and think of the last time that someone's angry Facebook post really gave us insight or led to meaningful changes in our thoughts and values. It just does not happen. I honestly can't think of one time ever that someone or a situation like that ever changed my opinion. In fact, as soon as someone starts raising their voice, I personally start to tune them out completely. And I know I'm not the only one that does that. It is a horrible strategy and certainly not a conduit for effectively spreading awareness if that is what we are actually trying to do. So when we do engage in political discussions, firstly, we want to make sure that it is a two-way street, that both people are willing and interested in having this discussion in the first place. But also our motivation must only be to share our ideas and not to try to change someone else's mind. It's not going to happen anyway, but the goal itself should be trying to explain our point of view and possibly the motivation for having it. Period. It can't be about trying to win, trying to take score, or trying to make the other person look bad. When I watch people talking about politics, I almost never see good and active listening. I see someone listening only enough for them to prepare the counter argument so that they can try to poke holes in the other person's viewpoint. And what does that accomplish? Absolutely nothing at all. Hostility or trying to make someone else seem uninformed or ignorant does nothing but make them never want to spend time with us ever again. We also have to remember that what is happening in our real lives concerning the people that we actually care about is much more important than agreeing on who's going to be in the White House. Our relationships last more than 4 years. So if these are relationships that we actually care about, we really have to keep that in mind. In other words, in the heat of the moment, we can forget about what really matters. Not saying our political opinions don't matter, but do they matter more than the people in our life? When we get so caught up in all of this, people start to take a back burner to these issues. So we have to remember that we are talking to real people here, and in many cases, real people that we genuinely care for and that we do not want to cause division between. And so we just have to remember to keep our priorities in mind when we're having these discussions. And I want to make one quick last point before we dive into solution finding, and that is that we just need to be careful all around about creating barriers or labeling people as different than us and building walls between us because we do have different opinions. In the end, we are all the human race. We are united because we all live on the same planet together, and I certainly would not want to live in some utopia where everyone thought the same and had the exact same opinion. Maybe that's just me, but I find that I learn so much from people that do have different opinions. And it doesn't mean we all have to agree with one another. Not at all. But honestly, if we don't respect one another, we are really going down a slippery slope. And I don't mean respecting opinions that are clearly dangerous or harmful or hateful. That is something else entirely. But generally, that is not what we're really talking about today. We are talking about taking things personally and rating people based on their opinions. It sounds so middle school, but as adults, we do it all the time. We give someone a higher rank in our eyes when they agree with us. And again, it is human nature, but we need to be careful because, for one, as much as we would like to believe that we are always right, it's simply not the case. And there really is value in considering other viewpoints, or at minimum, respecting the fact that someone else doesn't agree with our viewpoint. And that is fine. What we cannot do is let our ego take over and insist the whole world acknowledges that our viewpoint is the best one. Again, it's not going to happen, and it's not a realistic or a healthy desire. We must accept the fact that different opinions are out there, and that in many cases, they were created out of a rationality and a logic based on what they have experienced in their own life. And honestly, if we had lived their life, it is highly likely that we would have their same opinion. So that is something that we have to consider as well. So those are just a few thoughts I kind of wanted to put out there for your consideration. But most importantly, we need to find solutions. We don't want to be dreading Thanksgiving dinner or dreading running into that coworker that's constantly bringing up these issues. So in the end, if you think about it, what we really need to do is find ways to keep the peace, to survive the next couple of months. So let's talk about all the ways we can do exactly that. I'm going to talk about some general situations, and then lastly, I'm going to talk about family gatherings because they are just kind of their own type of animal. So let's start with the general situation. So before we walk into any situation where we have an intent to start a political conversation, we have to stop and ask ourselves, what am I trying to achieve? Am I wanting to badmouth perspectives that are in opposition to my views? Am I wanting to sway someone else's opinion? Do I want to prove I am right? If it is any of these things, we've got to be very careful because the research on this is extremely clear. It is that, again, it almost never works out to our favor, and in fact, usually causes way more problems than it's worth. It can hurt feelings and relationships and actually strengthen the opposing position because they get just so turned off by the approach. But if it is honestly because we want to know someone else's point of view, or that we are looking for a conversation that will be respectful and intellectual, we still need to consider whether the person that we're looking to have this discussion with is a receptive and willing partner in this conversation, and if having the conversation in and of itself is worth the risk. So the first thing is to make an honest assessment of the situation and then to act accordingly. So if it's not worth it, if it is not appropriate, if it will do nothing but create unwanted negative emotions, we have to think, is it worth it? What could I possibly gain from going forward with this? Now, again, I'm not saying don't ever talk about politics, but we do have to tread with caution. We have to know when it makes sense to do so and when it absolutely does not. And if you don't know whether or not it is appropriate, ask them. We can say, hey, I'm really interested in getting your opinion on the election or this issue or whatever. Is that something you'd be interested in discussing with me? It's a fair question, and it gives the other person a chance to decline before we put them in an awkward position. So that is definitely the first thing. Now, if we do end up talking about politics, we need to be extremely careful about our tone and our approach. Do not ever use sarcasm or a dismissive tone. It is rude, it is offensive, and it immediately ruins the chance of having a productive conversation. So we need to instead give the respect of fully listening to the other person's point of view, even if we completely disagree. We need to be careful not to distort also what the other person is saying or to group them into the overall opinions of a political party. We need to be objective and view them as an individual. We also need to try at least to have a relaxed and a gentle tone. We want to make sure if there is any criticism that comes up, that it is only a criticism of an idea and not the person themselves. And if possible, try not to have any criticism at all. We can instead search through what they're saying and find some kind of point that we actually agree with and kind of build on that from there. We could say something like, well, we have different perspectives, but I really like what you said about blah, blah, blah. Or I think we're in agreement that changes should be made, or something, kind of generic that brings in a commonality of some sort. And humor can help a whole lot, especially when things start getting out of hand. You could laugh and say something like, well, at least we both feel passionately about this, or something like that. Or you could simply end the conversation with something like, I really appreciate you sharing your viewpoint with me. We also need to look for cues that the conversation itself really needs to end. If someone is clearly getting really emotional or taking things personally, it is a solid indication that we need to either tone it down or end the conversation completely. And remember, if we can see that we have actually hurt someone, we need to apologize. There are often sensitive topics and people become emotionally charged and things can really spiral downward pretty quickly when we aren't careful. And when that does happen, we need to definitely say something like, hey, I'm sorry, that went a little too far and that was not my intent. I really do respect your view and I apologize for letting it get so heated or something of the sort. And as upset as we may be, we still have to take accountability for our words and for our approach. Now, in situations where other people are talking about politics and we just simply need a break or we are feeling uncomfortable, we need to find ways to communicate that. And it's important and appropriate to do so. We can say things as simple as, I'm sorry, this discussion is making me a little uncomfortable. Do you mind if we talk about this at another time? Or whatever we feel that we could possibly say. We cannot feel guilty about needing to end a conversation, especially when we know that it's going to be damaging to the relationship in the long run. A lot of people are just not that emotionally intelligent and don't pick up on cues that we are uncomfortable, or they don't care sometimes that we're uncomfortable because they are so passionate about what they are talking about. Or they feel like getting their point across is so important that it's actually worth it to make the other person uncomfortable. So either way, we need an exit strategy. So we can start with trying to express our discomfort. And if it doesn't work, we may need to make a physical exit. We can excuse ourselves to make a phone call or say that we need to check on the kids or on dinner or something. But it's better to remove ourselves than stay in a situation where we know we are going to get upset. And lastly, if we know ahead of time that we are going to be in a situation where politics are going to be discussed, we can say ahead of time something like, I don't want to be a party pooper, but I really prefer if we steer away from talking about politics tonight. Or, please don't be offended if I don't engage in political conversations. I find that they really tend to upset me, or something like that. Sometimes just letting people know ahead of time that you don't want to engage in it will make them more aware of conversation topics, or even successfully keep them from discussing it at all with you. The same with social media. You can let people know that you don't engage in political discussions, and you can also mute or hide anyone that is really aggravating you or triggering you. People do get really aggressive with social media posts, and a lot of my clients actually say that's what bothers them the most. So don't feel guilty if you need to hide stuff or walk away entirely from social media. I did that for 2 years. If it's not something that is enhancing your life, but actually causing you stress or anxiety, walk away. It doesn't matter what other people think or if they try to make you feel bad about it. Social media can just be incredibly toxic. And again, if it bothers you, you can mute anyone's account and they will never know, or you can take a break from it entirely. And by the same token, if you are the one that is always posting your political opinions, please remember to keep it respectful and know ahead of time that you are very unlikely to sway someone else's opinion. So I'm definitely not trying to censor anyone here. I'm just trying to be realistic and encourage you to have awareness that what you are putting out there can be hurtful to other people, even when that is not our intent. So again, it just becomes one of those situations where we have to ask ourselves, is it worth it? What am I trying to get out of it? And I don't have an answer for that. Maybe it is worth it, but it's just important that we think it through thoroughly before we post these things that can be very triggering to other people. Okay, so now let's get into the nitty-gritty. How can we survive family gatherings where there are differing political views that always seem to cause disruption? How can we keep it peaceful? I think it's a little sad sometimes because family gatherings are often very rare and right now may still be impossible because of everything that's going on. So we have to think of any time we get to spend with family as precious. It is just such a shame when these really beautiful opportunities to be with the people that we love get so heated. Whenever I think about Thanksgiving, I always think about this Saturday Night Live skit that I love that's about a family Thanksgiving dinner when everybody's arguing about politics and they keep playing this Adele song to kind of reunite them. If you have not seen it, please look it up. It is hysterical. But the fact is that so many otherwise really wonderful occasions really turn into stressful situations because of politics. So let's talk about this. What can we do when we know that someone will be attending that likes to stir things up, or that certain family members tend to always start unwanted political discussions? And I do mean the ones that are unwanted because, believe it or not, some families are actually able to have respectful and civil conversations that don't end in drama. So it's possible. But let's talk about the times when this is not the case. So I think the first thing that we need to remember is that it's important to be proactive in the situation. We need to know that if there's going to be a potential for this type of thing to happen, we need to talk about it to maybe some of the key players before the event takes place. We can talk about it to the actual people if we feel comfortable doing so, but if not, we can have an agreement with the other people in the family that, if possible, not even to talk about it, or to at least have everyone have an awareness that we are going to try to leave it off the table this year. And then come up with a game plan for what everyone can do if someone just insists on having this type of conversation, or have some planned phrases like, I agree these are important topics, but it's a holiday, so I think that, we should keep it light. but maybe next week we could talk about it on a Zoom call or something like that. But we just want to plan for when it is discussed, and maybe we can politely listen for a moment, make a light comment, and then try to redirect the conversation. But we want to know what the game plan is going to be before this day actually happens. We can also have activities planned like family games, or have a movie that everyone's going to watch that will hopefully keep everyone busy. Another thing that can be done is to have a different physical location that is designed for political talk. So maybe politics are only discussed on the porch or in the living room and by the people that choose to have these discussions. So anything to try to keep it away from the dinner table, or, make it optional in some way. And if it's a situation where it's pretty extreme, or we really know, again, the people that are most likely to start these conversations, we can have a seating plan that kind of keeps that in mind. So we can design where people sit, so we have certain people really physically separated from other people. And trying to limit alcohol consumption can be helpful also, as that can sometimes greatly add to the situation. And if we've done all these things and the conversations just get started anyway, we do need to express our discomfort and just remind the person that you love them and respect them, but that you would prefer not talking about this right now. You could say something like, I guess we'll just agree to disagree, or, something like that, and try to steer that conversation one more time in another direction. And other than that, if none of these things work, we just need to dig deep and try not to take it personally, because really, it is not personal. It is politics. It feels personal for all the reasons that we discussed earlier, but it is simply a viewpoint that another person holds. There is no confirmed right answer. We can just simply try to be that bigger person and allow the other person to express themselves, and just try to react as little as possible so that the problem and the situation does not escalate. And sometimes it's just that, damage control. Try not to be the one who starts the fire. Try not to open the door to conflict as much as we can. And no matter what, we have to try to remain civil. Some people just love to debate, and honestly, there is nothing wrong with that. I like to debate too, but timing is everything. And family gatherings are rarely, if ever, the time for it. But when it does all spiral out of control, know that you don't have to have a horse in the race. You don't have to react. You don't have to let it affect you. And you can go into the situation with the mindset that you are going to enjoy the situation and the celebration no matter what. Give yourself a pep talk before you go. And if you are going with your own little family members, remind them to keep it light and to be as kind and patient as possible if someone is taking the conversation in a political direction and that they are simply not taking any hints that nobody really wants any part of it. We have to really be compassionate. Politics often give people a sense of belonging and identity, and a lot of politics as of late affect people in a pretty direct way, and maybe they really feel that they need to express themselves. So when it comes down to it, just remember that you love this person and that it's actually okay to have different opinions, even between family members. We all have our life, and they have their own separate life. We don't have to agree on everything. We don't have to see eye to eye. We can genuinely care about a person and think their opinion is completely crazy and off base. And that's what we need to remember. we are lucky enough to live in a place where we are free to make our own decisions, and we certainly are not going to always come to the same conclusions as other people. And when we become okay with that, our lives suddenly become a lot more peaceful. And this is something that greatly changed my life when I finally got this concept. Now I can patiently listen to any number of viewpoints, and I genuinely try to understand where someone is coming from and try to learn something from their perspective, even when it's something that I simply have the polar opposite viewpoint on. There's always something that can be gained by having a, again, civil conversation with somebody else. It is not about winning or about proving ourselves or our point. So in the end, if the opinions that are expressed by others are ones we do not care for, we don't have to let it ruin our night. It is our decision how much we are going to let it affect us at all. And honestly, we can let it affect us literally 0%. But we need to have a plan, have the right mindset. We need to also have a sense of humor, because chances are we are definitely going to need it this season. So that's where I am going to leave it for today, but I truly hope that you found this episode helpful. I greatly look forward to reading your comments. They always generate a wonderful dialogue, and I really enjoy reading all of them. So please let me know your own strategies for surviving this election season and keeping all your relationships intact in the process. As always, I thank you so much for spending time with me today, and I greatly look forward to the next time. Please take a moment to subscribe if you have not done so already, and I will see you all soon. Take care, guys.